obviously coronavirus cases across the United States are continuing to increase, and it's got a lot of debate around the public policy implications of this. Look, 9 months in, bars are still open, many schools are still closed. There's not a lot of evidence that actually things should probably be the other way. California's governor is saying maybe they're going to have to go back on lockdown. Now we're talking about masks, and I think it's important always to actually listen to see what exactly Dr. Fauci is saying now in response to some of these officials who, in my view, and I think Crystal's view as well, are moving just a little bit too far whenever it comes to stuff, especially on the schools. Here's what he had to say over the weekend.
Close the bars and keep the schools open is what we really say. Obviously, you don't have one size fits all, but as I said in the past, and as you accurately quoted me, the default position should be to try as best as possible within reason to keep the children in school or to get them back to school. The best way to ensure the safety of the children in school is to get the community level of spread low.
And there you go, Ryan. And yet we're generally pursuing the opposite policy, especially like New York, right? One of the most restrictive states. They have kids home from school, but then they have their bars and restaurants open. And we all know why. It's because they need the tax revenue. I mean, they need businesses to start. And I don't blame them for that. I literally don't, because of the failure of Congress. But I just think that this entire situation, across, the piecemeal approach, and really it's become a culture war issue on all sides, it's been really a travesty, especially for a lot of children who are falling behind. This is anecdotal, really, but from Fairfax County, which is actually one of the richest counties in America, one of the best school systems, the number of Fs that they are giving out in school has up by 87%. My mom is a professor of early childhood education. She sees the same thing from many of her teachers as well, which is that failure rates, especially for lower income kids who don't have access to online learning and all of that, are just completely falling behind here. I think we are going to be dealing with the ramifications for this for a long time.
Yeah, and just to underline what you said there, this isn't a policy decision that was made rationally by public health officials who sat down and looked at the varying degrees of risk at different institutions and concluded that restaurants and bars ought to have priority and schools ought to be closed. You're right. It was a decision that was driven by action taken and not taken by Congress back in the early spring when they refused to give aid to schools. Now, if we had a different system where public schools were actually the ones that were pumping revenue into a city's coffers rather than extracting it, then you'd have a different scenario. You'd have the schools open and you'd have the restaurants and bars closed. But if Congress had stepped in and said, look, we're going to make states and cities whole through this pandemic, then policymakers could have sat down and made more rational choices. That was Mitch McConnell called that a blue state bailout.
Yeah.
Said we're not going to bail out these Democrat run cities, and so here we are today. And Fauci is right. It makes a lot more sense to keep the schools open. The kids have shown to be at much lesser risk. They're also not drinking and kind of hugging each other. You can ask the kids to wear masks and to keep a social distance. But when people are out at the bars, they might have their mask on for the first 5 minutes. Then they might be social distancing for the first half hour. After that, all bets are off.
Yeah, no, and this is what bothers me, again, is that it's becoming culture war. I remember when Trump, he obviously pours gasoline on the fire. But when the guy was talking about opening schools and all of that, everybody's writing all these takes. Oh, don't go to school. And look, now it's become San Francisco, right? Closed, completely closed. Mm-hmm. And here in D.C., as I understand it, New York City, yep. Millions of kids are now staying home because it's become a culture war issue. And I now see the same thing happening with masks. I saw this story from the Today Show. The Today Show. This thing goes to millions and millions of people. Let's throw it up there on the screen. They interviewed a bunch of people. They put a whole package together, which is basically like, masks are essentially going to become a permanent cultural norm. And I'm like, listen, this is the worst possible thing that you could say, right? Because a lot of these pandemic experts, much of their advice and all this stuff has been completely dependent and shifting upon the political winds. And by putting this stuff out there, you're just creating, in my view, the situation where you're going to have some Tea Party level explosion against this type of stuff, because they're going to say, and I think Fauci even said this, right? He's like, oh, well, even after people get vaccinated, you're going to still have to wear a mask. It's like, well, wait a second, you still have to? And I just think that there is not a lot of consideration here for how fed up so many people are with the whole system. And I'm not saying that that it's a good thing, but public health officials failed them. We talked yesterday, Ryan, about Fauci lied to the American people about masks. And then even in the beginning, many public health experts were against school reopening. And now, Fauci's out there for schools. And it just undermines a lot of faith in the system around all this policy.
Right. I was worried when Trump started going so hard on the school question.
Yeah.
That he would spark a backlash, because even if Trump is right about something, the best heuristic for a lot of people is, we'll just take the opposite side and you're going to be right. 90+% of the time. That was probably around the 10%. But in classic Trump fashion, he didn't pair his urging to keep schools open with any action to actually keep schools open. He didn't push McConnell. He didn't insist, like, I'm only signing legislation that helps schools stay open, that want to stay open. And then over the summer, you had public officials losing credibility by condemning anti-lockdown protesters for not wearing masks, but then not condemning the bigger Black Lives Matter and other protests that were happening around the country. Now, there was more mask wearing, but there wasn't. You can't socially distance when you've got tens of thousands of people packed into the street, and so it just added to that sense that there was so much culturally going on here, rather than just getting straight information from public health officials. And I wish everybody would just be honest and say, like, look, protesting on behalf of opening the economy, you want to do it. It's your personal choice.
That's right.
You should wear a mask. You should socially distance. This is our public health advice. Protesting against racism, that's your choice. We suggest you socially distance. We suggest you wear a mask. These are decisions that you need to make. Instead, you get mixed messages. And you could say, look, down the road, like in some Asian cultures where a lot of people still wear masks, if you want to keep wearing a mask so you don't get the flu, you feel more comfortable on the subway because you're used to it, go for it.
Right.
That's fine, but don't make it this cultural touchstone where you're like, kind of showing some passive aggression to somebody by either wearing it or not wearing it.
I completely agree. And you know what? Might keep wearing them in the winter because it keeps my face warm. I gotta say,
it feels nice.
It's nice in the cold. All right, guys, we're gonna have more Rising for everybody right after this.